Hi, everybody. This is Becky Heil. I am the Southeast District Consultant for the State Library of Iowa. And today we're here to talk about using statistics and stories as a call to action. The presentation today came about at the request of some librarians who attended one of my open forums. And we were talking about modern libraries and how they've changed from the past. And then how do we convince people that we're different than what they sort of have in their mind? So the discussion centered around successfully telling the library story. We also discussed how we can use those stories to change minds and gather support. So today I have broken the agenda down into a couple of parts. First, we're going to talk about what strategic storytelling is and why we use it. Then we're going to look at the three parts of strategic storytelling using data, crafting a narrative, and then applying visual treatments. Those are kind of the three pieces that we're really going to focus on. Then we're going to look at ways to get that story out there. How do you tell your library story? And then, of course, we'll have time for questions at the end. I am not going to be able to have access to the chat. I don't think my monitors are goofed up again today. So if you've got questions, you can put them in chat, but we'll get to it at the end. And so just a note, it is being recorded and it will be available in Workday. I've also got a handout with some of the resources that I talk about, along with more information if you want to learn a little bit more about some of these topics. So that will also be in Workday. You guys have a powerful story to tell. You are offering new programs and services. You're reimagining your library's physical space, or you're shifting the way you reach patrons. The key to your library's success is in how you tell this story. How do you describe the shift in clear and inspiring terms? It's up to you to use storytelling and data to communicate more effectively with your colleagues and your community. You also have stories to tell about your library's needs and successes. Story is a fundamental information form, and it's central to understanding social, collective, and community meaning making. Strategic storytelling or data storytelling is any presentation of data using narrative strategies in story form. It involves using data to craft a compelling narrative, often employing mediums like infographics, data visualizations, interactive maps, feature articles. It's an incredibly powerful tool for conveying complex information in a way that's easily digestible. It includes both information and emotion with an emphasis on action. Otherwise, there's no point. Why are we telling this story? We want to have something happen at the end of our story. Strategic storytelling involves first getting clear on why you want to tell your story, and then deciding how to do it in order to achieve the best results. It means taking a look at your internal and local assets, examining your community and its needs, then making choices about how you're going to use the storytelling to facilitate and enable the change that you want to see. The first thing we need to think about is you have to understand your end goal. What do you want them to do when you're done? That will inform the type of story you choose. I read about these techniques, and the first time I went through them, I really didn't quite understand it. So hopefully I'll be able to explain these in a way that kind of makes sense to you. So the first technique is justification. This uses evidence of needs to justify resource investments like time or money. You can use an assessment of your strength to justify resources that sustain or expand those strengths. You use assessment of deficits to justify resources that can make improvements. You might use this justification technique at budget time. Here is why we need this money. Justification. The second one is benchmarking. That's another technique that uses evidence of needs to compare with outside standards or trends. Use your evidence of strengths to compare with outside standards or trends and contribute to the larger community. Use evidence of deficits to compare with outside standards or trends and keep up with the larger library community. This might be one technique that you use for a specific ask, like a capital campaign to repair and renovate your building. You can compare yourself to other libraries in communities your same size. And then finally, achievement demonstrates that the needs are understood and the next steps to meet those needs are clear. Demonstrate that services are successfully meeting needs. Demonstrate that investments to build on strengths are effective and valuable. Demonstrate that investments to address deficits are effective and valuable. This might be the story type that you use in a grant application. Here's what we do successfully now. Here's what we could do to use more. Here's the achievements that we've done, and here are the achievements we would still like to accomplish. So why do we need both data and stories? Data storytelling can help turn data insights into action. Librarians understand the power of storytelling more than most. Yet, even when in the business of lending books and stories, it's easy to forget the power of your own story. Why you love working for the library, what your library has achieved, and what you've learned along the way. It's stories like this that help the public understand and connect with your library. It also helps staff connect with one another and their larger purpose at the library. On the left-hand side of the scale are some of the ways we communicate our stories. And on the right is the data. It needs to be a balance between both. Without effective communication, your insights can go unnoticed or unremembered by your audience. In the same way that both hard and soft skills are crucial for leveraging data to its fullest potential, you need to bring stories to the table along with the data. Constructing a data story that moves a person to take action can be a very powerful tool. Some benefits of the successful data storytelling might include it can add value to your data and your insights. You've learned something by looking at that data. Now we tell the story to add value to that. It can also help interpret complex information, and it can highlight essential key points for your audience. And last, it provides a human touch to your data. So the three parts of data storytelling are in this graphic. We're going to look at each of these individually in the next several slides. But let's start with what they are. So thinking about data on the bottom right there, you first need a thorough analysis of accurate, complete data, which then serves as the foundation of your data story. Analyzing data can enable you to understand its full picture. The narrative could be verbal or written. Sometimes it's called a storyline, and it's used to communicate the insights that you glean from your data, the context that surrounds it, and the actions that you recommend and aim to inspire in your audience. The third component, visualizations, are visual representations of your data and narrative, which can be useful for communicating the story clearly and memorably. These can be charts, graphs, diagrams, pictures, videos. I found differing opinions on where to start with these. That's why I put it in a circle. The order that I just gave you says, let's start with data first, and then we'll add in, the narrative and then add some visualizations at the end. But so that was kind of the first one. Then another one said, when they talked about digital storytelling, which basically just means using technology tools to tell your story, that says build your narrative first, then use your visuals, and then show data that supports that narrative, which I thought was an interesting sort of rearrangement there. That made me wonder then, could you also start with the visual? Maybe you decide how you want it to look, then you add your data, and then you tell the story that you've now created on that page. So I'm not sure there's a right or wrong way in the order that you want to craft these things, but they are going to be the three major components. So let's break those three down and figure out how we're going to use those. First, how is data used for storytelling? We're going to start by differentiating between qualitative and quantitative information as part of data collection. Qualitative data is descriptive and non-numerical, providing context and understanding for concepts and experiences, such as through interviews or observations. Qualitative tends to be a little bit more complex. It can show the layers of impact of your library's programs and services. Qualitative data shows a complexity that isn't always there with numbers alone. You can collect that qualitative data through a variety of ways. Things like open-ended survey questions, interviews, and focus groups. They all can produce qualitative data. It can be used to fill in the blanks that quantitative data sometimes leaves. How many times have you heard a statistic and you think, but what does that really mean? How does that actually, what's sort of the deeper message of that one? So I think that's where your qualitative data can come in. Quantitative data is numerical. It can be counted or measured. It may answer questions like how many or how much. Quantitative data can be very useful for budget presentations and quick, succinct explanations of how effective your programs and services are. Librarians tend to be very good at gathering and using quantitative data. We like our statistics. We know how to count the number of people, programs, books. You can also use a community scan or census or demographics as part of your data. The key difference is that quantitative data deals with numbers, while qualitative data deals with descriptions, qualities, and meanings. So a little bit later on, if we've got time, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. One of them is, are you able to gather qualitative data? I think that's harder for librarians to do, is pull in that qualitative. Like I said, we're good at the quantitative. If so, if you've used that qualitative data, how did you do it? And then what do you use it for? So we can talk about that a little bit at the end if we've got some time. It's easy to overlook the variety of data sources that are at your fingertips. Some of the most common include annual reports. You can see the one from Solid on the left there. Many, if not most libraries, turn some of the statistics that you gather for the state library for that public library annual survey, many libraries turn those statistics into an annual report to share with the community. Think back to what that printout looks like after you've filled in all those questions on your annual survey. And now Liz has taken that information and put it in that gorgeous tree with a lot of those numbers. The numbers are still there, but look at how much easier it is to see. So that's a piece of data that you can use and put into a different visualization there, which we'll talk about in a second. You can also use the state library's compilation of statewide library statistics, also known as the Big Book of Stats. You can use those as you're looking at benchmarking. Remember, we talked about that a little earlier. IMLS also has national information that you can look at to do benchmarking on a larger scale. Wouldn't it be interesting to know that your circulation is significantly higher than 80% of the libraries your size nationwide? Imagine giving that statistic to your city council. Surveys, getting feedback from residents can often show you trends that you might want to look at. And then up in the top right-hand corner, you'll see a comprehensive plan from Pleasant Hill. Using the information from a city comprehensive plan can give you some really good data done by experts, and it might reveal priorities where the library has a natural role to play. You can also use specialized software tools, platforms like Collection HQ and others that add another layer of usage and demographic analysis. I really liked this graphic that I've got here. I read an article called Know Thy Users, and this kind of goes back to gathering that qualitative data. This article speaks to the reasons that we collect the data and how important it is to tell the library story. So it says, bringing user research data to bear on the decisions you make about services, spaces, and interfaces will elevate the discussion from one based in staff opinion, we need more money, to one based on the actual behavior of the people you serve, your users. The library's not open during the time that I can get there. So now, why does the library need that more money? We need it to be open when our users have told us they want to be there. So we need to be able to expand our hours. So that's how important that user data is. So how do you gather qualitative user data? Certainly, conducting surveys can help identify trends. Things like quick dot voting exercises, and don't just leave this one in your library. Do it at the bus stop. Do it at the farmer's market. Do it in the high school lunchroom. A handful of colorful stickers can yield valuable insights for you. Try a post-it wall. You can pose a single question in the library and invite comments on it. And an important reminder, while libraries often focus on engaging non-users, we like to be out in the community and find out what they need and want from their community. Don't forget your regular patrons. We need to understand their needs and show how you value them. That is just as critical as looking at our non-users. There was a report titled Benchmarking, Finding Meaning Through Comparison by Cullen and Nelson, and it emphasized it's not about the quantity of data, but how you use it. And chances are your library already has more at its disposal than you realize. Currently, there's an emphasis on telling the library's story through qualitative measures. You might have heard about outcome-based evaluation. It helps a library explain why their services are so important, not just how much we do. So there are two kinds of results you can get. Outputs are the direct, tangible products or services that result from a project or activity, while outcomes are the broader, often intangible results or changes that occur because of those outputs. Outputs are the what we did, whereas outcomes are the what happened as a result of what we did. For example, the output is the training class being offered, while the outcome is whether participants improved their skills after the class. Outcomes aren't only qualitative. Sometimes we equate those two things that, the outcomes need to be qualitative, but they can also be quantitative. Like 60% of the people who took this exercise class feel it has improved the quality of their life. So it's an outcome. The quality of their life has changed, but we can put a number on it. 60% of the people said that. Outputs are the numbers we gather for the annual report, and the outcomes add value to those numbers. Before you decide which stats to use, you need to figure out which data to gather. In both those processes, you might ask yourself some of the following questions. How clearly does this metric align to an articulated outcome or impact? What are we trying to accomplish by telling this story? What is the call to action? So here's what we might think about. Do I need to include information about children's programming in my pitch to get more money for technology? If I don't, that might be a great number, but if it doesn't have anything to do with what I want them to do at the end, there's no point in gathering it, and there's no point in putting it into my pitch. Second question, who cares about this metric? Just us? What about staff? What about funders? Or what section of the general population would find this data informative? So again, has your city council set a priority for making technology available to their community? Then you want to make sure and gather data showing your need, or it could be the fact that you have a strength in that area, depending on what it is that you're asking for. And a third question is, why do they care? Again, the city council might be businessmen focused on the lack of skilled employees. So asking for money for technology training shows you care about what they care about. Another question, how can they act on it? Using data to make one point, like our broadband speed is really slow in our area, but then making your ask about something else doesn't give them the right information to do anything about your cause. Make your ask clear. If we have X amount of dollars, we can upgrade our tech and bring in outside experts to teach weekly classes to job seekers. Fifth question, whose perspective does this metric reflect or emphasize? In libraries, we always try to focus on the users and the potential users. Sixth question, how do people closest to this work feel about it? Now, at a minimum, this might be the staff who do the work. What do they think about this metric? But ideally, we want to consider the community as well. What do you think about this one? Does it really tell what we want it to tell? And then the last one, How do we gather this information in a way that is ethical, accurate, and manageable for staff and participants? We want to make sure that that piece of collecting this data ethically, you want to think about privacy and you want to think about informed consent. We're going to use this data in this particular way. Let your folks know when they're answering those questions for you. So now let's move on to narrative. We draw people in with deeper emotional content. We can give people a reason to celebrate. We can identify community issues and how the library can address them. Language is not only a reflection of society, but it can also be a catalyst for social change. Now I'm going a little bit deep here. I did a lot of really cool research on this. So we're going to start with the ancient Greek thinker Aristotle, who wrote in his Poetics about effective dramatic structure. A whole, thinking of a whole story, should have a beginning, a middle, and an end. A well-constructed plot must neither begin nor end at haphazard. So again, I think that idea of a very consistent narrative is what he was trying to get at that there. Behind every good story, whether it's a novel, play, a movie, or a library presentation, is a solid narrative arc. Before you begin writing, it can be helpful to draw one up to get a sense of what story you're trying to tell. There are a couple of really academic papers and toolkits by Dr. Kate McDowell on data storytelling for libraries. So these next two slides are taken from her work on crafting narratives. A traditional narrative arc is simply the development or resolution of the narrative or principal theme. It has 5 elements in the following order. First is exposition. This is the reader's introduction to the story. The exposition offers background information to prime the audience for the rest of the story, including introducing them to the main characters, the who, the setting, the where, and the circumstances or time period, the when. And again, we're talking about crafting novels and crafting TV shows, but think about this and how do you apply this as you're creating your narrative to take to the Lions Club or wherever you're going to tell them this library story. The second piece is rising action. This is when conflict begins to ramp up. The rising action usually begins with what's called an inciting incident, the triggering event that puts the main events of the story in motion. This is when the audience starts to see what your story is really about. The third piece, the climax. This is the highest point of tension in your storyline, and often the point at which all the different subplots and characters converge. Typically, the climax requires the main character to face the truth or make an important choice. That choice is one of the things we're going to be thinking about as we're taking this out into our community to tell our story. Fourth piece, falling action. This is what happens as a result of the protagonist's decision. During the falling action, the conflict gives way to resolution. Loose ends are tied up and the tension begins to dissipate. Then comes resolution, also known as a denouement. This is how your story ends. The resolution of the narrative arc isn't always happy, but it does close the loop and show how the events of the story have changed the characters and the world around them. Did I just take you back to junior high English class? Um, this is the kind of, I remember learning the word denouement in junior high and thinking it was such a cool word. And so I think, again, these are ideas that you want to keep in the back of your head as you're putting together this story. There is another type of story arc which might suit our purposes a little bit better, and it's a very simple one, that of rising action. Begin with a conflict, build the suspense, then give the answer and the call for action. So think about how, again, that might be something that you take to the um, women's group, the women's club, to come up with a specific ask. So you start with that conflict. What's the problem that we have? Then you build the suspense. How are we going to be able to fix this? And then you give the answer and the call for the action. This info from Dr. McDowell is a little bit more complicated. It's taken me several times through this to kind of figure this out and have it make sense in my brain. I think I've finally got a hold on this one, though, so hopefully I can explain it in a way that makes sense to you. She talks about three narrative structures. So continuity is the first one. This story, again, the way we craft a story built on continuity, is about stability and resilience despite challenges. I heard a presentation a few years ago at a conference about a newcomer to the community who didn't speak English. He was frustrated in his ability to get a job. He couldn't get around town. He finally found materials at the library that he could use to start learning things. He also found a friendly librarian at his local library. And so he spent a long time trying to overcome those. I don't have a job, so I can't get a car, so I can't get to the job on the other side of town. So how did he, and this is the story that he's telling us, and again, for me, it sort of fits under that continuity. He talked about his struggles all the way along, but he kept persevering. The cool thing at the end of his was that he was at the library so often, he learned English, he had gotten a job, so he had some stability in his life at that point. He actually applied for a job as a janitor at the library, got that job, started kind of working his way up again as his English improved. He worked there for a while, but then he eventually got a job outside of the library and became a library board member. And when the time came for the library to go out for a bond referendum to build a new library, he headed up that committee in order to get that new library because he recognized how important it was for the people in that community. So again, I think it's that stability, resilience, the challenges that are there, and how somebody just keeps working their way through them. Transformation, then, is the second one. This story expresses awe and joy at watching a hero triumph. You're going to hear about that one in one of the stories by Jamie LaRue in a minute here. Discovery is the third one. This one was a little bit harder to understand, I thought. This story starts with a mystery, and then there's the satisfaction of coming to understanding. There's a question, an uncertainty, and you use your data and information to have a revelation. The example that Dr. McDowell used in her presentation was about how and why a library added new technology. The headline was, Library responds to user survey results with technology improvements. The librarian stated, we have analyzed results from a patron survey and we've changed our investments in technology. Now we are ready to showcase the new computer workstations, laptops, and other equipment ready for checkout. The question was, what do our patrons need for technology? So they asked that question in a survey, the discovery piece. Then they got to announce the new technology to the community. Very short narrative, but very effective. There are lots of good books on how we as humans are wired for story. Storytelling involves both science and art. Neuroscience tells us that listening to a compelling story can actually increase our synaptic activity, and then why that happens. We can use that science to craft a more compelling story. This graphic is from an article by Brandon Dragomir from Brand Storytelling, and he talks about that increase. There's been a lot of research lately about how reading can improve empathy. I'm sure you've seen some of those. Stories get us to care about the characters, about the people. While the science is still early, there's lots of interesting pieces about how we see other people. And by seeing someone else experience something, what happens to them can affect us on an individual level. And they see those responses literally in the brain. Brandon mentioned someone named Paul Zak in this article, and Paul asked the question, why are we so attracted to stories? So he spent the last several years in a lab seeking to understand why stories can move us to tears, change our attitudes, our opinions, our behaviors, and even inspire us. And then he looked at how do stories physically change our brains, often for the better. One answer they found was that stories are personal and emotionally compelling, and they engage more of the brain. And so they're better remembered than simply stating a set of facts. They also discovered that there are two key aspects to an effective story. First, it has to capture and hold our attention. The second thing an effective story does is transport us into the character's world. Another person who's done some research on the neuroscience behind storytelling is Lisa Cron. She says, our brains have figured out a way to process an astronomical amount of information. Our conscious mind registers only a tiny segment of that information. Stories can help us make sense of all the data coming into our brains. Instead of just trying to understand the data, stories add emotional impact that affect change. So we craft stories that engage the heart and mind of our listeners. In a very real sense, stories can literally change minds. We use them to alter someone's opinions, but the very process of storytelling can alter our brains in a very positive way. So here is Jamie LaRue, who has done a video that's a lot longer. I'm only going to show about 2 minutes of this one. So I want you to listen to him, and he's an expert on crafting a library story. You'll notice that he reiterates many of the things that we just talked about. Now, I did not include in this video him telling the actual story. So you'll hear him talking about, here's the story I just told about this young boy named Caden. What we're going to listen to, though, is the elements that he used and how he put that story together. So if you actually want to hear Caden's story, you can find it on YouTube by searching for Jamie LaRue. Search Jamie LaRue advocacy storytelling, something like that, and it was done in 2017. Now, Amanda, I'm going to keep my fingers crossed that this is going to work.
This is how we tell a library story. And let's break this down again. How does it begin? Give me a real person. Not just a situation. Now, we serve teenagers, we serve senior citizens, we serve children. Caden was 3 years old. Specific. Then give me a problem. That's the hook of the story. Caden stutters. That's the issue, and that's what gets you emotionally invested in this story. Then introduce library as supporting character, not the main character. Library, what do we do to intervene, to assist with this? We have a program where you come and you read to dogs. And then give me one fact to ground the story, so I know you're not just making it up. And if I say, many, many libraries around the country provide programs for dogs, I say, yeah, okay, that's reasonable, I believe that. And the last thing is, as a preacher friend of mine used to say, give them the phrase that pays. Give them a short, succinct, memorable phrase that will carry that message home. And so note again that this is the process through which we don't just keep people entertained, we're establishing a message of value, and we're doing it in a way that changes people's minds, not by pummeling them with facts, which is the library tendency. Come in and say, here's all of the information, and once you know the information, you'll change your mind. Information doesn't change people's minds. Stories do. And so if I start with an emotional connection and give you one fact at the end and one phrase that pays, this has been demonstrated by brain research to work. And that's how you tell a library story.
All right, I'm hoping that worked and you all got to see that. He is, this was in honor of Bonnie McEwen, who's Jamie is one of her all-time favorite people. But I think it's a really great way as you're looking at taking that story out, kind of a simple way, and he's got some really good facts in there for you to be able to use. So now I want to head on. So we finished up with narration or with narrative. Let's head on to the third part of data storytelling, visualization. Data visualization is the process of turning insights into visual formats like charts and graphs so that the information is easier to understand. There are many types of visualizations like maps, tables, infographics, diagrams, even heat maps. And I showed one of the kind of newer ideas. If you remember back to the one where we talked about what are those questions we want to ask about the data, and it had that little blue box called a dashboard. And that's a way, again, to take all of this disparate data and put it into one place where people can get information. So dashboards are another way that we can, another type of visualization. Data visualization makes it easy to see patterns, like in the graph that I circled in red down there. it is quite clear that all three lines rise and fall basically along the same trajectory. How fast and easy was it to see that when you looked at that chart that was there, or the graph? A simple chart like a pie chart helps us make complex things easier to see at a glance. Then the infographic on the left, thank you to, I think it was Rhinebeck that I pulled this from, uses blocks, big numbers, and colors to grab attention. That's another thing that visualizations can do. I personally find tables like the brown one on the right a really good way to organize information. Maps can help us visualize spatial distances, or it can also use color to show patterns. Using something out of the ordinary, like that diagram with all of the circles, can do a lot of things. First, it grabs attention. That's different than what you typically see, but it can also help us see the relationship between things. Data visualization is particularly important in the era of big data, where vast amounts of information need to be analyzed and presented in a way that's intuitive for decision making. It can also increase engagement. Another thing to think about is sets of graphics can be useful for providing context. So maybe you need to show the data on a map as well as with a pie chart, and then also in a table in order to understand all the facets of the data analysis. One of the primary concerns when visualizing data is the risk of misrepresenting it. We've all seen that recently. Poorly designed visualizations can easily mislead the audience. Skewed axes, distorted scales, or just using selective data presentation can exaggerate trends or hide important information, distorting the true meaning of data and potentially leading to faulty conclusions. Now I'm back to neuroscience again. I really enjoyed digging into this. Let's delve a little bit into how neuroscience explains visual communication. The human brain is inherently wired for visual processing, a trait that is deeply rooted in evolution. The brain prioritizes and excels at interpreting images, colors, patterns, and motion over text-based inputs. On brain scan heat maps, the areas tied to memory and emotion light up in response to creative visual content, while barely activating for less engaging materials. Visualization works because of things like faster processing, better memory retention, increased emotional response, and the ability to simplify complex data. The brain can process images much faster than text because it engages with different cognitive pathways. Visual information creates stronger neural connections, leading to a higher rate of recall compared to text-heavy content. Effective visuals can trigger a more significant emotional response and higher levels of engagement than text-based content. By presenting information in an intuitive, easy to follow format, visuals can eliminate ambiguity and enhance comprehension. Last fall, Canva published the State of Visual Communication report, the neuroscience behind why design-led companies win. Some of my big takeaways from that report were, number one, clarity has become the most valuable currency in modern work. That I thought was really interesting and seemed true to my mind. Content with visual treatments boost emotional intensity and likability. Three, visual communication is no longer optional, it's essential. Think of your social media and all the advice that you've been getting about that and using videos and visuals when you do that. No longer optional. Another one that I thought was very interesting, 90% of Gen Z employees say they do their best work visually. So if we as a library are having to start communicating visually because it's no longer optional, we've got those Gen Z folks who are working in our libraries right now, and 90% of them say that they do their best work that way. What an easy way to put people together and find work that fits with your staff. Last piece, before your message is read, it is felt, since most of our decision making happens in the subconscious. So that's sort of the neuroscience piece of this. But putting that aside, why exactly do these visualizations help tell our story better? So these are some kind of fun facts. Now, I did my best imitation of a reference librarian to fact check these, which came from a variety of articles and other presentations. I verified that the sources were real, and I'll tell you what those sources are in a second here, but I didn't actually read all the primary sources. The journals really do exist. AI didn't make them up. So here's a couple of fun facts. 90% of information transmitted to the brain is visual. That came from a book by John Medina, published in 2008, called Brain Rules: 12 Principles for Surviving and Thriving at Work, Home, and School. Another one, visuals improve retention by 42%. This came from an article titled Effects of Text Illustrations, a Review of Research, and it was published in 1982 in the Educational Communication and Technology Journal. Another one, people follow visual instructions, get this, 323% better than written ones. This was a study that was published in the journal Applied Cognitive Psychology. 323%. That was not a typo. When I first read it, I thought it was, but I was able to verify that in other places. And again, it was in the journal Applied Cognitive Psychology. 65% of the population are visual learners. Now, this one was interesting. It was actually done in a study by J.S. Brunner in 1966, and it was called Studies in Cognitive Growth. I'm curious to know if that number has changed since then. Also, I happen to be in the 35% that is not a visual learner, and I have noticed in libraries we have a lot more verbal learners that work in libraries. So I think this one is sort of an interesting statistic to kind of delve into a little bit more. And again, it goes back to that idea of we need to add context to this data, which obviously I'm not doing here. Visuals increase engagement levels by 94%. This was from a 2017 report called The State of Inbound Marketing. Another one, users recall 80% of visual content after 3 days. This was probably the most interesting one, and if I'd had time, I'd have gone back and actually read this report. It was done in 1946, and it was called Edgar Dale's Cone of Experience. And so at that point, 1946, he was doing experiments and research and found that users recall 80% of visual content after 3 days. I would love to dig into that one a little bit more. Now, the last one I did not put on the screen because I've discovered it's probably not legit. I found it everywhere, in articles in Forbes, in articles, all over the place. It said humans process visuals 60,000 times faster than text. Originally, from what we can tell, it came from a 1982 report from the 3M Corporation, and it was called Studies in Visual Communications. But nobody has been able to figure out where the data actually came from. They can't seem to verify that there was actually a study done. I don't know if IBM just made that number up or they took something and changed it a little bit, but that's one that I did not include on the slide because of that reason, that we can't actually verify that. But again, we did learn on that previous slide that we do process visuals a lot faster than we process text. Might not be 60,000 times. So now that we've looked at those three pieces, we know how and why we use the data, the narrative, and the visualizations are so important to tell the story. Let's spend a few minutes figuring out how to get that story out there. First, you need to have a story worth telling. Show what matters and why. Don't be afraid to use other people to tell the story for you. Both Jamie LaRue and a storytelling kit that I read give guidance on how to get library advocates to speak on your behalf. When you send people out or you go into the community to do some data storytelling, don't forget to tailor the story to your audience. Here's another one. There is no more powerful communication technique than the simple act of one person talking to another, or word of mouth marketing. Who's more likely to persuade you to try a new restaurant in town? A TV commercial, a review of the restaurant in the newspaper, or a good friend? Why? Chances are you'll remember and believe what your friends tell you more than any TV or radio commercial ever will. And we have some of the evidence of that we learned in that neuroscience part. Silverman also says word of mouth is thousands of times more powerful than conventional marketing. You are thousands of times more likely to act on a recommendation of a friend, colleague, or trusted advisor than you are to a commercial communication. Why is that so powerful? It's real and immediate. It's personal, not a pitch. It's honest. It's catching, and it's customer driven. Now, this quote specifically talks about marketing and what I've been talking about here, but think about that idea of using word of mouth as a very effective way to get your story out there once you've got it crafted. One place to get some of those narratives is to gather testimonials. This is so simple and yet so hard for people to do. When somebody says something nice about you, your library, or a staffer, ask if you can write it down and use it. There are wonderful things going on every day in your library. You are touching the lives of many, and those are the kinds of stories people want to hear, especially those who hold the purse strings. Gather those heart-tugging stories and use them. So here's a few tips on gathering and using them. People tend to be reticent about sharing their stories, so start with an easy question. Why do you love the library? What keeps you coming back? How does the library affect your everyday work? Honor their privacy and ask for permission to share. If you're recording it, use a simple, cheap method like a smartphone or a digital camera. Another piece of advice I found is if you're recording it, keep it short. Aim for 15 to 30 seconds long and don't exceed 90 seconds. Another tip, have a special place to record those positive staff and patron interactions and keep it up. You might need to constantly remind staff to log those interactions. Have a place where patrons can post, either anonymously or publicly, their thanks to the library. I still really like the old ALA campaign, Libraries Transform. They used the statement because to ask people why they love the library. So I've got one more short video. Any of you who have been in something that I have done in person over the last 15 or 10, probably 10 years, have maybe seen this already. So my apologies. I also apologize for the really annoying music that's in this one, but it is something that tugs on my heartstrings every time I see it. And I think it is such a great example of using those testimonials to advance your story. So let's get us going here. Talk about emotional impact. Although this might be a little short on actual data, so it doesn't quite follow the pattern that we've been talking about now. Maybe throwing in some library stats might be a good way to improve this final product. What if the library added a few statistics between each of those presenters, like how many audiobooks they own, or how much audiobooks cost, or put in a statistic about how many people come to the computer classes that are led by community members. Maybe include a slide with the number of puzzles that are donated by the public and how many people use them on a monthly basis. I love this video. Maybe there are some ways that we could improve that. I don't even think this one can be improved. But if we want to start using those stats in there, I think this is a really great, a great way that you could do that. Okay, now let's put this into practice and craft our own library story. So my first thing is I want to decide on my call to action and my audience. So I know the Lions Club likes to support kids, and I know that they're interested in hunger. So my call to action is going to be, I want you guys to give me some money to be able to fund this program that we're doing. So here it is. The library is going to use that achievement technique to ask the Lions Club to fund snacks for the after school program. Our call to action and our audience and the structure that we're going to use. Now we're going to use our data. Let's look at some quantitative. 40% of our city's school-aged children are food insecure. Qualitative. We asked K through 5 teachers what they see as the biggest barrier to student learning. They stated it's difficult for kids to learn when they're hungry. Adding the visuals. Here's one way. So 40%, that's 4 out of 10. I decided to make it more of a classroom when I added this visual. So I did 8 out of 20, thinking that's a normal classroom size because we got this data from our, we use this data with the information from our teachers. So 8 out of 20 kids in our community are hungry or food insecure. This was a picture. It was very late last night when I was trying to find this picture, and what I really wanted was a little kid looking at an empty refrigerator, but this is as close as I could get. So again, visuals are not my thing, but find someone who can help you as you're putting this visualization piece together, if that's not your thing either. Create a narrative. So here's Jamie's advice. Make it about a real person. Have a problem. Have a library intervention, and add a fact. I left off the last one that he talked about was sort of the phrase that pays, because I'm, again, bad at that and couldn't come up with a really good one. But that's that last piece is you want to have that short, succinct phrase that you can use. So here's the narrative that I created. Carla, who is a working mom, is happy to have a safe place for her kids to go after school while they wait for her to get off of work. Her kids love the snacks they get at the library while they play with Legos or do homework. Our library provides snacks for 10 to 15 kids every day after school. It costs about $20 a week to fund this program. So we've got the real person, the problem. Her kids don't have any place to go after school and they are hungry after school. Library intervention. We provide a safe place and we provide that food for them. And then the fact, we provide those snacks for 10 to 15 kids every day. That's the fact that we're using. And then it costs $20 a week. And then we've also got our data from before, but here's the fact that we use in our narrative. So what do we do to get that story out? So here we go. The children's librarian asks her neighbor, who's a member of the Lions Club, if the library could give a short presentation at the next club lunch. She brings a handout with some of those visuals. Then she tells Carla's story to the group. She ends by asking them to fund the after-school snack program for 3 months of the year. So hopefully this last little bit here has brought together all of the information that we've talked about here. So I can't finish up without talking about resources for you. Some of the information I shared today came from these 3 places, but I also want to mention that these resources have lots more great information that could round out this presentation. If you're not familiar with Ripple, the Research Institute for Public Libraries, they have free online archived trainings about anything to do with library research and data. We used one of their trainings for the basis for our learning circuits this year. They also hold in-person multi-day trainings that I would encourage anybody to explore. WebJunction, I found about 6 to 8 really good webinars that expand on these topics. And remember, if you take a WebJunction course, you don't have to do a separate external credit form. The last item on here is this toolkit. It was created by the State Library of Pennsylvania with funding from IMLS and a few other contributors. But I can't seem to find the actual toolkit online anymore. I downloaded it in August, so it was there, but it seems to have disappeared. They mentioned sharing widely in the document, so if you want it, please reach out to me. it is very specifically focused on that idea of changing the story of libraries and then using volunteers to take your message to the public. So it's got a lot of tips on training your volunteers, where to find them, that kind of stuff. But you might find some of their other tips useful. So just as a reminder, I did include a 4 more information handout in the CE catalog. It will include links to the videos, other presentations, articles, and books, some of which I actually mentioned in the presentation, but some I used for background. And then if you want to go deeper into the topics, there are some really good additional resources that are listed. So don't forget to tune in for Stats and Stories Part 2, a panel discussion. In December, 3 librarians are going to share their stories about using data and storytelling to make a difference in their libraries. So thank you to everybody for being here this morning. Thanks to Amanda for being my producer and keeping me on track. And I told her when we started, I wasn't sure I was going to have enough to fill the full hour and we'd have plenty of time for questions. But of course, I'm at the very tail end of my time today. I will still hang out if anybody's got questions. But again, if you need to leave at the end of the hour, feel free. Um, I hope to hear later from all of you about all of the really great things that you accomplish by taking your library story to the community. So now I will go back and see if we've got any questions in here. I got what, 2 minutes? I did pretty good.
Perfect. I didn't see any
Yeah.
questions. Sunny did ask when the part 2 is in December. I think it's on the 10th.
I'm not sure. Sorry, I
Let
don't
me.
have it at hand.
Oh, I'm looking quick. I think it's December 10th. I don't know why my computer doesn't go.
I might be able to find that on my phone now that I think about it. Calendar.
Maybe not. I don't.
Oh, got to switch glasses again. All right. So anybody have questions on any of this? Let's see, November. I want to go to December. Yes, it is December 10th in the
1:30.
afternoon at 1:30. Yep. Amanda and I got it at the same time
Okay.
there. So yes, it is recorded. I think we talked about that. It will be in the CE catalog or the Workday Learns catalog.